greatest fantasy matchup in bodybuilding history. The question that's been whispered in gyms around the world for decades, debated in forums, argued about in comment sections, and dreamed about by fans who wish they could witness the impossible. Who would win if Arnold Schwarzenegger and Ronnie Coleman faced off in their absolute prime? The myth. Arnold Schwarzenegger, the man who put bodybuilding on the map and made it a household name. 7-time Mr. Olympia, the Austrian Oak, the Terminator, the Governor. A man who conquered not just bodybuilding, but Hollywood and politics as well. The ultimate embodiment of the American dream.
Every single thing that I've done in my life, people always said to me, that's impossible.
Achieved through sheer force of will and an unshakable belief in his own destiny. The King, Ronnie Coleman. The man who redefined the limits of muscle mass and showed the world what the human body could become when pushed to its absolute limits. 8-time Mr. Olympia, the most dominant champion in the sport's history. A quiet giant who spoke softly, but carried the biggest physique the world had ever seen. Everyone has an opinion on this matchup. Arnold fans point to his superior aesthetics, his perfect proportions, and his undeniable charisma. Ronnie supporters argue that mass is king, that size trumps everything, and that Ronnie's sheer physical dominance would overwhelm any competition. But the answer is simpler, and at the same time more complex than you think. This isn't just a comparison of muscles. This is a story about two different eras, two different philosophies, two different definitions of perfection, and the shocking truth about why Arnold Schwarzenegger would always lose the battle against Ronnie Coleman. Not because he was inferior, but because they were playing completely different games. To understand this matchup, we need to travel back in time and understand the worlds that created these two legends. Because the truth is, they weren't just separated by years. They were separated by entire paradigms of what bodybuilding could and should be. To understand Arnold, you need to understand the golden era of bodybuilding, roughly spanning from the 1960s to the early 1980s. It was a time when bodybuilding was still finding its identity, still figuring out what it wanted to be when it grew up. It was a time of artists and philosophers, of men who saw bodybuilding not just as a sport, but as a form of self-expression, a way to sculpt the human form into something approaching perfection. The goal wasn't just to be big. Anyone could get big by eating too much and lifting heavy weights. The goal was to be beautiful, to create a physique that was pleasing to the eye, that embodied classical ideals of proportion and symmetry. A perfect V-taper that flowed from broad shoulders to a narrow waist. An impressive chest that projected power and masculinity. Arms that were large but not grotesque. Defined but not overly veiny. Arnold was the Michelangelo of muscle, the artist who took the raw material of his genetics and sculpted them into something that transcended mere physicality. His physique told a story. It spoke of power and grace, of strength and beauty, of the potential that lay dormant in every human body, waiting to be awakened. But Arnold wasn't just about the physical. His character was that of the charismatic conqueror, the man who didn't just win competitions, but won hearts and minds. He understood that bodybuilding was as much about presentation as it was about preparation, as much about personality as it was about physique. He could pose like a dancer, speak like a philosopher, and command a stage like a born performer. Arnold's approach to bodybuilding was holistic. He trained his mind as much as his body, studying psychology and business while he sculpted his physique. He understood that true success required more than just muscle. It required vision, charisma, and the ability to sell not just a physique, but a dream. His training was methodical but not obsessive, intense but not destructive. He used anabolic steroids, but in doses that seem almost quaint by today's standards. His diet was disciplined but not extreme. His lifestyle was focused but not monastic. He was building a physique, but he was also building a life, a career, and a legacy that would extend far beyond bodybuilding. Ronnie's world was completely different. By the time Ronnie Coleman reached his prime in the late 1990s and early 2000s, bodybuilding had undergone a fundamental transformation. This was the mass monster era, a time when the sport had become obsessed with size, when bigger was always better, when the question wasn't how beautiful, but how much. He didn't need to say much. When you're carrying 300 pounds of muscle at 5% body fat, your body speaks louder than words ever could. But don't mistake Ronnie's quiet demeanor for lack of intensity. His training was legendary in its brutality. His dedication was absolute, and his willingness to push his body to its limits was unmatched. He trained with a focus and intensity that bordered on the supernatural, lifting weights that seemed impossible for a human being to handle. Ronnie's approach was scientific and systematic. Every aspect of his preparation was calculated, measured, and optimized. His nutrition was precise to the gram. His training was periodized to the day, and his supplementation was comprehensive and cutting edge. He was less an artist than an engineer, building his physique with the precision of a master craftsman. The conflict between these two approaches isn't between two men, but between two ideals, two philosophies, two completely different visions of what the perfect physique should look like. Aesthetics versus mass, art versus science, classical beauty versus modern extremes. And in the arena of professional bodybuilding, the winner is determined by the rules and standards of the day. So let's break down this fantasy matchup, pose by pose, muscle group by muscle group, and see what would really happen if these two legends faced off on the same stage. Let's start with the front double biceps, perhaps the most iconic pose in all of bodybuilding. Arnold's biceps are the stuff of legend, those famous peaks that seemed to defy gravity, the perfect shape and proportion that made them instantly recognizable, even to people who knew nothing about bodybuilding. His biceps weren't just big, they were beautiful, artistic, the kind of muscles that belonged in a museum. But Ronnie's biceps were something else entirely. They weren't just muscles, they were monuments, massive, dense, striated beyond belief. They dwarfed Arnold's in terms of sheer size and conditioning. While Arnold's biceps were works of art, Ronnie's were forces of nature. In a modern bodybuilding competition, judged by modern standards, there would be no contest. Ronnie's superior mass and conditioning would overwhelm Arnold's aesthetic advantages. The judges would admire Arnold's shape and proportion, but they would be awestruck by Ronnie's sheer size and detail. The side chest pose tells a similar story. Arnold's chest is one of the greatest in bodybuilding history. Thick, full, perfectly shaped, with that classic barrel-chested look that epitomized masculine power. His ribcage expansion was legendary. His chest-to-waist ratio was perfect, and his overall presentation in this pose was nothing short of magnificent. But Ronnie's side chest was a study in mass and conditioning that redefined what was possible. His chest wasn't just thick, it was mountainous. His shoulders weren't just broad, they were architectural. His arms weren't just big, they were overwhelming. Standing next to Ronnie in a side chest pose, even Arnold would look small. The back double biceps is where the difference becomes most apparent and most painful for Arnold fans to acknowledge. Arnold's back was excellent for his era. Wide, thick, with good detail and the classic V-taper that flowed beautifully from his lats to his waist. It was the back of a champion, the back that helped him win 7 Olympia titles. But Ronnie's back was a roadmap of muscles that seemed to have been carved from granite. The width was incredible, the thickness was unprecedented, and the level of detail and conditioning was something that had never been seen before in the sport. His back wasn't just impressive, it was intimidating, overwhelming, almost frightening in its massiveness. Every muscle group tells the same story. Arnold's legs were good for his time, but Ronnie's legs were in a completely different universe. Arnold's shoulders were impressive, but Ronnie's shoulders were architectural marvels. Arnold's conditioning was excellent, but Ronnie's conditioning was otherworldly. But why is this difference so dramatic? Why does Ronnie seem to dominate Arnold so completely in every comparison? The answer lies not in their genetics or their training, but in the evolution of the sport itself and the tools available to each man during their respective eras. The knowledge about training and nutrition had grown exponentially between Arnold's prime in the 1970s and Ronnie's dominance in the early 2000s. Training methods had become more sophisticated, nutritional science had advanced dramatically, and the understanding of how to maximize muscle growth and minimize body fat had reached new levels of precision. But perhaps more importantly, there's the elephant in the room that everyone knows about but few want to discuss openly: the pharmaceutical advancement. The substances available to Ronnie, insulin, growth hormone, IGF-1, and a host of other compounds. Ronnie had access to pharmaceutical protocols that could produce levels of mass and conditioning that were simply impossible in Arnold's time. This isn't to diminish either man's achievements. Arnold maximized what was available to him in his era, just as Ronnie maximized what was available in his. But it does explain why a direct comparison is inherently unfair to Arnold. He was competing with 1970s technology against 2000s technology. His unprecedented mass, his incredible conditioning. Now let's imagine the impossible. Picture them standing side by side on the Mr. Olympia stage, both in their absolute prime, both at their best. The lights come on, the music starts, and the greatest fantasy matchup in bodybuilding history becomes reality. Arnold steps forward first. He hits his front double biceps with the confidence and charisma that made him a legend. The crowd goes wild. This is Arnold Schwarzenegger, the man who made bodybuilding famous, the Austrian Oak in all his glory. His physique is a masterpiece of proportion and symmetry. Every muscle perfectly balanced, every line flowing into the next with artistic precision. The judges appreciate what they're seeing. This is classical bodybuilding at its finest, the kind of physique that inspired generations of athletes. Arnold's presentation is flawless, his conditioning is excellent, and his charisma fills the entire auditorium. But then Ronnie steps forward. The reaction is immediate and visceral. Gasps from the audience, widened eyes from the judges, a collective intake of breath as people try to process what they're seeing. This isn't just a bigger version of Arnold. This is something entirely different, something that challenges the very definition of what a human body can become. Arnold has the charisma, the perfect lines, the classical beauty that made him a legend. He's the hero from a Greek myth, the embodiment of masculine perfection as it was understood for centuries. But bodybuilding isn't a beauty contest, and it's not a charisma competition. It's a sport of illusions. And the greatest illusion is that of size and conditioning. Next to Ronnie Coleman, Arnold Schwarzenegger would look small. Not just smaller, small. The man who dominated his era, who seemed impossibly huge to audiences in the 1970s, would be dwarfed by the mass monster from Louisiana. The judges of the modern era are trained to value mass and conditioning above all else. They would admire Arnold's aesthetics, respect his proportions, and appreciate his presentation, but they would be overwhelmed by Ronnie's pure physical dominance. His unprecedented mass, his incredible conditioning, and his imposing stage presence. In every mandatory pose, except perhaps the front double biceps, Ronnie would show more muscle mass, more detail, more conditioning, and a more imposing presence. The shocking truth is that it wouldn't be a fair fight. Arnold would be judged by the standards that Ronnie created, and by those standards, he simply cannot compete. But does this mean Ronnie is better than Arnold? Does it mean that Arnold's achievements are somehow diminished? Absolutely not. That's the wrong question entirely, and it misses the point of what makes both men great. It's like asking if a Formula One car from 2024 is better than one from 1974. Yes, the modern car is faster, more advanced, more technologically sophisticated, but the driver from 1974 was a pioneer who achieved greatness with less advanced tools, who pushed the boundaries of what was possible with the technology available to him. Arnold was the pioneer who opened the doors and made bodybuilding mainstream. He took a niche sport, practiced by a small group of dedicated athletes, and turned it into a global phenomenon. He showed the world that bodybuilders could be more than just muscle-bound freaks. They could be artists, entertainers, businessmen, and leaders. Without Arnold, there would be no platform for Ronnie. Without Arnold's charisma and crossover appeal, bodybuilding would have remained a small underground sport with limited commercial potential. Arnold created the stage on which all future champions would perform. Ronnie, on the other hand, was the innovator who showed what was physically possible within the world that Arnold had built. He pushed the boundaries of human potential, demonstrated levels of mass and conditioning that had never been seen before, and redefined what it meant to be a champion in the modern era. The resolution of this fantasy matchup isn't a victory for one or the other. It's the recognition of their different, but equally important roles in the history and evolution of bodybuilding. Arnold was the ambassador who brought the sport to the masses. Ronnie was the ultimate expression of what the sport could become when pushed to its absolute limits. They're not rivals, they're two kings of two different, but equally legendary kingdoms. Arnold ruled the kingdom of aesthetics, where beauty and proportion reigned supreme. Ronnie ruled the kingdom of mass, where size and conditioning were the ultimate measures of success. The lesson here is that greatness is contextual, that champions are products of their times, and that comparing athletes from different eras is both fascinating and fundamentally unfair. Arnold was the greatest bodybuilder of his time, perfectly suited to the standards and expectations of his era. Ronnie was the greatest bodybuilder of his time, the ultimate expression of what his era valued and rewarded. But there's another lesson here about the evolution of sports and the double-edged sword of progress. Arnold's approach, while less extreme, was more balanced and sustainable. His physique was impressive but not grotesque, enhanced but not dependent on dangerous levels of pharmaceutical intervention. His career in bodybuilding was the foundation for a lifetime of success in other fields, rather than an all-consuming obsession that left little room for anything else. This raises important questions about the direction of bodybuilding and what we should value in our champions. Should we celebrate the absolute extremes of human potential, even when they come at significant personal cost? Or should we value balance, sustainability, and the kind of physiques that inspire rather than intimidate? The rise of the classic physique division in modern bodybuilding suggests that there's still an appetite for the kind of aesthetics that Arnold represented. Athletes like Chris Bumstead have shown that you can build impressive, championship-level physiques without reaching the extremes of the mass monster era. But the open division, where Ronnie made his mark, continues to reward mass and conditioning above all else. The current champions are carrying even more mass than Ronnie did, pushing the boundaries even further, and raising questions about how far the sport can go before it becomes something entirely different from what it started as. The discussion about Arnold versus Ronnie will never really end, and that's perhaps the beauty of it. It keeps the legends alive, sparks passionate debates among fans, and forces us to think about what we value in a physique and in a champion. It also highlights the subjective nature of beauty and perfection. Some people prefer Arnold's classical aesthetics, his perfect proportions, and his timeless appeal. Others are drawn to Ronnie's incredible mass, his unprecedented conditioning, and his demonstration of what's possible when human potential is pushed to its absolute limits. Both perspectives are valid, and both champions deserve respect and admiration for what they achieved in their respective eras. Arnold showed us that bodybuilding could be art, that muscles could be beautiful, and that champions could transcend their sport to become global icons. Ronnie showed us that the human body could be pushed further than anyone thought possible. In the end, both men achieved something that very few people ever do. They became legends. They inspired millions of people to pursue their own fitness goals, to push their own boundaries, and to strive for their own version of perfection. They showed us that with enough dedication, discipline, and vision, ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things. The real winner in the Arnold versus Ronnie debate isn't either man, it's the sport of bodybuilding itself, which has been enriched by both of their contributions. Arnold gave bodybuilding its soul, its personality, and its mainstream appeal. Ronnie gave it its ultimate expression of physical potential and competitive excellence. But now I want to hear from you. If you were the only judge, if you had to choose between these two legends based purely on their physiques, who would you pick? The myth with his classical beauty and perfect proportions, or the king with his unprecedented mass and incredible conditioning? More importantly, what do you think each man's legacy means for the future of bodybuilding? Should the sport continue pushing toward greater and greater extremes following Ronnie's path, or should it return to its roots and embrace the kind of balanced aesthetics that Arnold represented? These aren't just academic questions. They're fundamental issues that will shape the future of bodybuilding and determine what kind of physiques we celebrate and reward. The choices we make as fans, athletes, and industry professionals will determine whether bodybuilding continues to evolve, or whether it needs to take a step back and rediscover what made it special in the first place. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Let's settle this debate once and for all, or at least until the next video. Because in the end, the greatest victory isn't winning the argument, it's keeping the conversation alive and honoring the legacies of both of these incredible champions. Thanks for watching this deep dive into one of bodybuilding's greatest debates. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more analysis of the sport's biggest questions and most legendary figures. Until next time, keep training, keep dreaming, and remember that greatness comes in many different forms.